Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by Feedspot as one of the top 10 obsessive-compulsive disorder podcasts. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at familyocd.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at familyocd.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, simply visit familyocd.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. This podcast was recorded June 12, 2020. This is podcast number 46, called Food and Anxiety. It's a bonus segment. And in this podcast, we're going to discuss the 8 worst ingredients in processed foods. And this is a list that I got from Dr. Mercola from Mercola.com, MERCOLA.com. Now I know I've done a series of 4 different podcasts on food. So this will be the last for now. But I feel very strongly about food and how food is our medicine. Food is what we need to really watch when it comes to our bodies, when it comes to anxiety, especially things like OCD, which is what I talk a lot about. So I'm sorry if this was a lot, but I think it's extremely important to understand how important food is to us, how important the gut is to our brain. So let's talk about these 8 worst ingredients that are in processed food. Last podcast or so, we talked about processed foods. And these are the ingredients of it that really make it not good. Number 1, artificial sweeteners. We've seen them. They've been around for quite a long time. As an example, aspartame. And one of the really detrimental things about aspartame is that it kills 50% of your gut flora. That's the stuff that's very important, the bacteria and all that are in your stomach that help process food so you can intake the right amount of food and nutrition. You know, we've seen things like sweet and lows and stuff like that. And what happens with artificial sweeteners is they cause inflammation. They can also cause insulin resistance for diabetics. So instead of artificial sweeteners, you probably want to look at honey, sugar, agave, stevia, things like that, more natural, real food versus that. Number 2 is trans fats and vegetable oils. Now, a trans fat is a oil that has been hydrogenated. Now, I used to be in the oil, no, I shouldn't say oil business. It doesn't sound like I'm a tycoon out of Texas. But I used to sell food products, and one of the products I sold was a food oil. It was called Melfry and some other things from Durkee. And I learned a lot about hydrogenation there. And that what it does is it solidifies it. What you might remember, especially an older person like myself will remember, I think it's still out there too, Crisco. It's a solid block of oil. And they do that for stability, for shelf life, for holding flavors, things like that. But those things also are inflammatory. They become toxic to our body. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they can become a carcinogen. I think, if I remember right, them telling me that. I didn't write it down, but I believe that. So you might want to look at other oils. And we talked about oils in one of the other podcasts, like coconut oil, olive oil, grapeseed oil, or some different alternatives that you can do instead of these trans fats. Coconut oil is a very strong one. I think grapeseed is another one that's a strong one. Dr. Smith talked about that. Number 3 is artificial flavors. And these are heavy chemicals. Understand that. They also can have been known to lead to cancer. They have some play on Alzheimer's. And they can be labeled in a couple different ways, like artificially flavored or just flavored can also mean that. They sometimes, too, natural flavors are a fool or two. Those are still chemicals. So we want to make sure you look at that label like we talked about in the past podcast. You want to look towards real fruit, and especially organic real fruit is really what you want to stay with. Number 4, MSG, monosodium glutamate. This interferes with brain and the neurotransmitters in your brain and messes with them, really, basically is what it does. And you'll find that a lot, like I say, unfortunately, a lot of Asian food has heavy in MSG. And when you go to a restaurant, you can ask them to not put MSG in it. What you want to do as an alternative, of course, you want to do like raw salt, Himalayan salt, or sea salt, things like that that are less processed. Number 5, food dyes. And those are usually marked with a color and a number, like red dye 4, something like that. And those cause hyperactivity, cause allergy issues. They can be cancer causing, all of that. And you really don't want them in your food. You'd want to probably look at how you could color food using beets are a good coloration. Uh, I think prunes even. You can look at more natural ways of coloring food. Number 6 is high fructose corn syrup. And again, you can see this as fructose syrup, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup. They've really taken that word out because it's become, people are knowing that word, but they're calling it syrup, corn syrup, fructose, all these different names. You really got to pay attention. And those interfere with liver function. They can really mess up liver function, become very toxic. Number 7 is preservatives. Ones like BHA, BHT, and I don't know if I can even pronounce them, but you want to look out for those. You don't really want those. Those are cancer-causing, toxic chemicals, and they're allergy issues. Number 8 is GMOs, genetically engineered ingredients, genetically modified, um, and they cause inflammation. You know, in the past podcasts on the food, I believe it was Dr. Smith talked about anytime you separate and take apart food, you lose the bonding and the nutrition that is in that bonding, and it can decrease the nutrition of it. That's just one part of it. Plus, they're doing these um, engineering by going into genetics of it, which we really don't have a lot of research on, and those kind of genetic changes can affect our body, our own genetic makeup, and cause a lot of problems. So we want to look at these ingredients and like we talked about, I think it was in the last one, about how to shop for it, how to find it, looking at that ingredients label, turning it around, and if you don't understand what the products are, then you don't really want to get it. It should be pretty simple products. One thing that I'll mention here uh, that I find very interesting, we actually ship overseas healthier food than we sell here. because the overseas countries, the international, doesn't always allow for the junk that we put in our food. And always remember, inflammation in the body equals inflammation in the brain. So I wanted to go, though I'm going to go over, I went over those kind of quickly. You can go to Dr. Mercola's website again, mercola.com, mercola.com, and research even more about these different ingredients. Because what I want to do now is, Dr. Smith was kind enough to share with me another podcast that he did on tips on healthiness that I wanted to share here in this podcast as part of this podcast. So I'm going to now pass it off onto Dr. Smith's podcast for you to listen to and hopefully get some things out of. And I hope these few little details here helped you out, and these tips are going to be good for you too. So take care, and we'll go on to Dr. Smith now. And now let me introduce Dr. Michael Smith with Carolina's Natural Health.
Hey, Dr. Smith here, and I want to talk with you a little bit about anxiety, because I know it's one of these things that a lot of people have been struggling with, especially these days with everything that's going on in the world and just this state of uncertainty. And there's some really important things you can be doing to help to reduce your level of anxiety that can really make a difference for you. And one of the things that is to create some consistency in your day. And so some of this can come down to the routines in which you may be using, because a lot of our routines have been disrupted. And so thinking about putting back in place some consistency around your routines, and probably some of the most important ones is your wake up and your bedtime. And those are key ones because they also help to make sure you're getting enough sleep and beneficial sleep that can help to improve the neurotransmitters in your brain that can help to reduce anxiety, as well as your hormonal balance in your body. Another thing that's really beneficial is to make sure that you're feeding and fueling your body in a healthy way that can help to support yourself. Because a lot of times when we're stressed and anxious, we may be making food choices that aren't always the best for our overall health and don't actually help with the anxiety. Things that may be higher in sugar or higher in caffeine or alcohol. All of these things can aggravate anxiety by creating greater imbalances in the body. So you want to be thinking about putting good, healthy foods into your body, things like fresh, ripe fruits and vegetables, so that you can feed and nourish your body with the right nutrients, but also help to take better care of your gut and your digestive health. Now, you may not realize that your gut health has a lot to do with your mental health. In fact, the gut is often referred to as the second brain. And it is so because we have the highest concentrations of neurons outside our brain in our digestive system and digestive tract. It's also where we produce a lot of the neurotransmitters that directly affect our mood and our mental function. So it's really important and it's vital to ensure that you're taking good care of your gut health and your digestion. So some tips around that. One I mentioned is making good food choices to ensure that you're putting healthy foods into your body. Now, I recommend that you consume things that I call whole foods, and those are things that don't come in a package and aren't processed. So things like your fruits and vegetables, your lean quality proteins, that are good, ideally organic sources, so you're not introducing chemicals into your body that your body doesn't want or can cause or create other inflammation or imbalances in the body. You also want to make certain that when you do sit down to eat, that you're actually taking the time to eat and becoming what I refer to as a conscious eater, chewing your food well, using your teeth as they're designed to break up that food so that you can absorb the nutrients better. But that also helps to calm some of the inflammation that you may have in your digestive tract, so that we can help to ensure that your body is able to produce more of the healthy neurotransmitters that can help to reduce your level of anxiety. And doing this can also help to improve your digestion, which is also a good benefit. Because I know a lot of times when people are anxious, they may have some digestive symptoms, things like diarrhea or constipation or indigestion, reflux, cramping, things like that. that can help them not feel well, in addition to already being anxious. So keep in mind these simple key steps that you can be doing on a daily basis or multiple times a day every time you eat. So you're making better food choices. You're becoming a conscious eater by taking the time to chew your food well, actually taste it and enjoy it, helping to improve your overall digestion and gut health, and putting in place good, consistent routines into your day to give you a greater sense of control over your life in this time. I hope this is helpful for you. This is Dr. Smith with Carolina's Natural Health Center, and I'm looking to empower you to better health.
This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.